Yes, yep. Mike, can you get the door? We're in Mark 14, the Gospel of Mark, chapter 14. If you want to go ahead and turn to Mark 14. We've been working our way through Mark. It's taken us, I don't know how long. We've been in it quite a while, but chapter 14 is where we made it to. Let me just do a couple of concluding remarks. We didn't really get to cover all of what took place there at the end of chapter 13, which was the record that Mark gives us of the words of Jesus concerning the destruction of Jerusalem. So let me just kind of summarize a couple of things. One is that when I look at these accounts in Mark, Matthew, Luke, one of the things I keep in mind is that this is something that is answering the question that the disciples asked, which was, when will we know about this destruction that's coming, the destruction of Jerusalem? And so it seems that it's not really about end times. It's not really about the end of time or the second coming of Jesus, but it really is all about the destruction of Jerusalem. One of the things that he talks about there is that these will be the signs of the things that you'll recognize that will be the coming of this destruction. He says that as he closes in verse 32, that no man knows the hour. He'll come like a thief in the night. I think 1 Thessalonians 5 kind of sums up our response to and maybe our view of the second coming, which should be what Paul told the Thessalonians there, which is watch and be ready. There's no need to try to predict or know or any of that, because nobody knows. Nobody has any clue, really. So somebody tells you they do, you need to go somewhere else, because they don't. So chapter 14, the plot to kill Jesus begins now in great earnest, because they are only 2 days away from the Passover, and they determined that it's during this time, the next 2 days, that Jesus has to die. This chapter 14 is a real turning point, because now what you're going to be focused on is Jesus on the cross. You're going to be focusing on how Jesus wound up on the cross, how it is that it all worked out so that Jesus was crucified. And that's what you find beginning in chapter 14, verses 1 and 2. Then you look at 3 through 9, put all of that together. You have the fact that Jesus is saying the time has come, and the religious leaders are saying the time has come. Chapter 14, verse 1, it says, the chief priests and the scribes were seeking how to arrest him by stealth and kill him. Arrest him without everybody knowing, arrest him so that we don't stir up a real crowd, we don't make anybody angry. We're trying to figure out how we can do it. And the preface to that is, well, let's read chapter 14, 1 and 2. It was now 2 days before the Passover and the feast of the unleavened bread, and the chief priests and the scribes were seeking how to arrest him by stealth and kill him, for they said, not during the feast, lest there be an uproar from the people. So we're going we've got to take care of him. We got to kill him. We've got to arrest him in order to kill him. But we're not going to do it during the Passover. We've got to find a way to do all of this so that it doesn't cause an uproar. And so, in these first two verses of chapter 14, the obvious purpose for these verses is that Jesus is warning about the time that's coming. They're not going to listen to reason. They've already made up their mind. There's no repentance going to take place. The bottom line is that the time has come. Jesus realizes that it has come. The scribes and the chief priest realize that the time has come, and so they're going to begin to carry this out. So what happens next is chapter 14, verse 3 opens up with Jesus in Bethany, which is a town near to Jerusalem. That's where Mary and Martha and Lazarus lived. And at this time, he's eating at the table of a man named Simon the leper. Now, I'm going to assume that he was healed, that he was no longer a leper, because you're not going to get anybody to his house to eat, except maybe Jesus if you throw a party and you're a leper. So nobody's going to come to that party. So it's Simon the leper, and there are people in the home that we can assume that they were opposed to Jesus, and you have the disciples present. So let's read 3 through 9, chapter 14, beginning in verse 3 through verse 9. That's a whole section, a whole paragraph. And while he was at Bethany in the house of Simon the leper, as he was reclining at table, a woman came with an alabaster flask of ointment of pure nard, very costly, and she broke the flask and poured it over his head. There were some who said to themselves indignantly, "Why was the ointment wasted like that? For this ointment could have been sold for more than 300 denarii and given to the poor." And they scolded her. But Jesus said, "Leave her alone. Why do you trouble her? She has done a beautiful thing to me, for you always have the poor with you, and whenever you want, you can do good for them. But you will not always have me. She has done what she could. She has anointed my body beforehand for burial. And truly I say to you, wherever the gospel is proclaimed in the whole world, what she has done will be told in memory of her." So the setting is clear, and this woman comes in and begins to anoint Jesus with this pure nard, this ointment. Evidently, it was an oil that was used in the finishing of perfumes. Maybe you took some of that, added a little perfume to it, or maybe it was a perfume for its own. It was expensive, though. That's the point, because it is said by those who were complaining about this that it could have been sold for 300 denarii. Now, denarii was a day's wage for a laborer, so that gives you an idea of how expensive that would have been. So it was quite expensive, and so they're very indignant. They're giving her a hard time. There's the scolding. It says they scolded her. Verse 5, the end of verse 5, and then Jesus begins with his part of the conversation. He says, "Leave her alone." Okay, that's the first thing that he states. Observe that when someone is being mistreated, someone is being chastised in the presence of Jesus, he goes quickly to this: "You guys leave her alone. Why do you trouble her?" The reason he says, "Why do you trouble her?" is because she has done a good thing. Notice, why do you trouble her? She has done a beautiful thing for me. You shouldn't be talking about her this way. There's no reason. There are no facts. There's nothing that you can give that would make it right for you to behave this way or to judge her in this way or to speak these things about her. There's nothing that would make that right or make that okay. Why do you trouble her? She's done a beautiful thing. You always have the poor with you. You can give to them. You can take care of them anytime you want, but you will not always have me. So note that as the first reference that Jesus makes to the fact that he doesn't say that it's close, but he does speak of the fact that I will not always be here. You won't always have me with you. I'm not always going to be present with you, so you can't always have your opportunity to worship me or to do things for me, but you will always have the poor. And notice what he adds to that. You will not always have me. Verse 8, she has done what she could. She has anointed my body beforehand for burial. So she did what she could. It sounds to me like what Jesus is hinting to is that this is pretty much all she had. If you added up all her worldly goods, this is probably pretty much it. If you did a tally of all the things that she owned and what she could bring that would benefit Jesus, this probably was the only thing she had. And probably something that she was saving for a time when she needed it, a time when she might need that in order to survive. I'm not sure exactly what would have been the case when it comes to what she would be doing with this, but it was often kept, something like that was often kept for future expenses and a time in the future when you would need something. Well, what Jesus says is she did what she could, and she prepared me for my burial. So there's the second reference to his death. You will not always have me with you. And now he says about this woman who anointed him, she was anointing me for my burial. The end of verse 8. And truly I say to you, whenever the gospel is proclaimed in the whole world, what she has done will be told in her memory. Well, here we are. We're doing exactly what Jesus said would happen there. And so in verses 6 through 9, Jesus takes the opportunity to chastise these who are judging her, who are thinking and speaking degradingly of her action. And Jesus defends her and says she did what she could. You always have the poor with you. You know, why wasn't this sold and the money given to the poor? You're going to always have the poor with you, but you won't always have me with you. And she was doing what she could by preparing my body for my burial. Now, something that Jesus has been dealing with all along is the misunderstanding of his disciples. Remember that we've talked about that all the way through the Gospel of Mark, that he's trying to get the disciples to come to an understanding of who he is. Because even when Peter said, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God," it's almost as if he said it, but he wasn't sure what that even means, because he immediately is going to chastise Jesus for Jesus saying, "I've got to die. I'm going into Jerusalem and die." No, you can't do that. You can't. Well, wait a minute. You just said I was Jesus Christ, the Son of God, and now you're telling me what to do, and you're telling me I can't die. You know, so which is it? Who am I? Who do you think I really am? So one of the things that's going to be driven home here, it began in chapter 14, verse 1. One of the things that's being driven home is that Jesus is coming to the reality of his death, and now it's going to have to become a reality for the disciples. It won't be easy. It won't be an easy transition. The other accounts are going to give you more details. John's account of these last hours gives you a lot of detail, because John teaches a lot during this time, from the time of the Last Supper or the Passover meal that Jesus shares with his disciples. And that's coming in the later part of this chapter here. But when Jesus takes that opportunity to teach his disciples in 5 chapters there in the Gospel of John. So he's still trying to get it over to them. He's still trying to get them to understand that his kingdom is a kingdom that in order for it to be established, he has to die. To become the king, he has to die. And so he's still trying to get that across to them. So the defending of the woman that Jesus does here, she has done what she could. She's displaying love and devotion to Jesus. She's worshiping him. She's declaring by this gift that she loves him and that she's committed to him. And so Jesus indicates that what she has done is something that she does out of great awareness, which the disciples and others didn't have. What was she aware of? The text doesn't really tell us what she was aware of, but she came to worship Jesus. She came to do this thing, to bring this ointment. She came to do this. She broke the flask and she poured it over his head, and Jesus accepts that worship. And they become indignant. They become haughty. They become judgmental. And Jesus says, stop it. Leave her alone. She gets it. You don't get it. She gets it, but you don't. And so that I think is part of the reason for this story. And maybe when we think about her and what she did, one of the things that we're reminded of in our memory is that somebody got it. Somebody did actually get it, who Jesus was and what he came to do. Okay, any observations through verse 9 or anything else you'd like to bring up?
People that want to do things for the church and all that, you got folks that come up and say, what are you doing that for? Or why don't you volunteer for that? Mm-hmm. Why not all of us be more of a volunteer than be like the disciple here, and just whine about somebody doing something for the church or for whatever. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Barry brings up a good point. One of the things like her that we are is we're individuals. We're individual Christians. We do belong to a body. We belong to a local congregation, to the body of Christ. But we are responsible for what we do individually, and we are not limited in what we could do. And I think that's a good observation. Anything else? Isn't it interesting what man sees as wasteful extravagance, God sees as something totally opposite? Because man looked at that, judged it, and said, can you believe she did that? That's terrible. She should have done it differently.
We always teach and learn not to care about material things and not to be greedy. Is there a lesson in this of using finances and material for worship, or sometimes it's okay to have a nice thing and use them instead of selling it to give money away like everything? Is there a deeper lesson there?
That's interesting. I think any time that we sacrifice, the Lord is going to be pleased. And if we use what we have rather than selling it and giving the money to the church, if we use what we have to bless people, then that is maybe what's going on here. Yeah, okay, so let's say, I don't know, let's say I own a school bus, and I can sell that bus for $1,200 and give it to the church. but I can take that school bus and I can take kids to Mother's Day out, or I don't know what, I can take kids anywhere. So I do that 2 days a week for 48 weeks a year for 10 years, which is best? The $1,200 you gave to put in the church treasury, or you using your possessions? See what? I think you're right, yeah. Sometimes it's best to use what we have. I mean, I could sell my car and give it to the church, or I can take folks to the hospital, and help them for doctors. Yeah, I think so, yeah. If I hold on to it greedily, then I better sell it. I better sell it if I hold on to it greedily. I'm not going to let you have that one. That's mine. I worked too hard for that.
I'll take people and talk to them about you. And you know what he did? The Lord blessed him with a new boat, and he's converted a bunch of people.
How about that?
Or at least talked to a bunch of people in that boat.
So, all right, so you had boat evangelism. I've heard of golf course evangelism. I don't know how that works, but yeah. All right, look at verse 10 and following. Then you have Judas, actually 10 and 11. We'll just take that one to begin with, because this is going to be the betrayal of Judas. We're familiar with that story. Notice what 10 and 11 say. Then Judas Iscariot, who was one of the 12, went to the chief priests in order to betray him to them. And when they heard it, they were glad and promised to give him money, and he sought an opportunity to betray him. Okay, so Judas is fitting right into the plan of these scribes and chief priests in that he volunteers to give them Jesus. I don't know all of the details of that. I know the 30 pieces of silver, the price of a slave, and I know that. I know that when it ultimately took place, there was that kiss of betrayal that that was used to identify who Jesus really was. I've had people ask, well, didn't they know who Jesus was? Didn't they see him? Didn't he embarrass them? And in places like this, they saw him. Didn't they know who he was? Well, this was God's plan, and Judas fit right in, and his decision is put in right here, and it says, then Judas Iscariot, who was one of the 12, went to the chief priests in order to betray him to them. So he fit right into the plan to kill Jesus. He is a betrayer. Even though he was sorry for what he did, even though he wished he could take it back, he came after the death of Jesus and threw the money. They wouldn't take the money back, but he threw the money down, and he went out and hanged himself. That a sad response to this betrayal, but it pretty well describes it there in just those two verses, chapter 14, verses 10 and 11. Anything about that? All right, verses 12, and this next section really goes all the way through verse 21, because here you have the interaction with Jesus and the disciples at the Passover. So you begin with the preparation for the Passover, and then you have the Passover meal, and then the institution of the Lord's Supper that's going to take place in 22 and following. So let's go ahead and look at that. I'll read beginning verse 12. We'll probably just go all the way through verse 21 to give us a good context of our discussion. 14:12 through 21. And on the first day of unleavened bread, when they sacrificed the Passover lamb, his disciples said to him, "Where will you have us go and prepare for you to eat the Passover?" And he sent two of his disciples and said to them, "Go into the city, and a man carrying a jar of water will meet you. Follow him, and wherever he enters, say to the master of the house, the teacher says, where is my guest room where I may eat the Passover with my disciples? And he will show you a large upper room furnished and ready there. Prepare for us. And the disciples set out and went to the city and found it just as he had told them, and they prepared the Passover. And when it was evening, he came to the 12, and as they were reclining at table and eating, Jesus said, truly I say to you, one of you will betray me, one who is eating with me. They began to be sorrowful and to say to him one after another, is it I? He said to them, it is one of the 12, one who is dipping bread into the dish with me. For the Son of Man goes as it is written of him, but woe to that man by whom the Son of Man is betrayed. It would have been better for that man if he had not been born. All right, note a couple of things. There's going to be evidently this preparation that has been made ahead of time, miraculous or otherwise. Jesus knows how everything is going to play out. So they go into the city. They follow the man with the water jar and they inquire, and there, sure enough, is that upper room that Jesus described that was already furnished, and they were told there to prepare. So they prepare for this Passover meal. So that's really through verse 16. You have the upper room that is acquired. You have the preparations that are made. It's even described that as being furnished. So you've got the table and the recliners in there, and so the meal is prepared. Everything is ready. Everything is set up. And then verse 17 is going to begin that actual Passover meal. Something that I thought about when it talks about the furnished room, something that's not talked about in Mark's gospel, but something that is talked about at great length in the Gospel of John, is the basin and the water pitcher. Remember that one? Now, it's not talked about here in Mark, but in the furnishing of that room, it would have been usual and normal for that room, even though it was a rented room, to provide a basin and a pitcher of water for the washing of feet. It's not mentioned here, but you get the understanding that in those verses 12 through 16, that Jesus describes the room as furnished. It's described as being furnished. So a part of that furnishing of the room would have been what would be needed to wash the feet of those who visit or those who come to this assembly. And obviously we know the end of that, and that is that nobody did, so Jesus ultimately did. Okay, verse 17 then, you have the next section where it's actually the Passover meal, and so that begins in verse 17. Jesus came with the 12 at evening time, and they were all reclining at the table. And this is where Jesus says, there's one here who will betray me, one who's eating with me. They were all very upset about it. The English Standard says they were sorrowful. Obviously, there was a lot of tension, and there was a lot of questioning going on, and they were even asking about that, and they would ask the question, is it I? Am I the one? He said to them, this is verse 20 and 21, it is one of the 12, one who is dipping bread into the dish with me. For the Son of Man goes as it is written of him, but woe to that man whom the Son of Man is betrayed. It would have been better for that man if he had not been born. So you have the description of Jesus partaking of this Passover meal, and he identifies that one of the 12, by the way, that's exactly how Mark put it in verse 10 when he said Judas Iscariot, one of the 12, would be the one who would betray Jesus. And then Jesus' final words about that is, it's one who's dipping bread with me in the dish. Obviously, they would sop. All of us Southerners know what to sop is. You take the bread and you sop of the oil and herbs and spices, those kind of things, and you would sop and eat, and so they would be using a common bowl. Oh, you didn't double dip, by the way. You weren't allowed to double dip. So there's the identification of one that would betray, and the words kind of ring in the air, I think, as Jesus speaks them when he says it would have been better for that man if he had not been born, as he closes out this part of the Passover meal. All right, any observations or comments? Why would Jesus be doing this? I mean, he's going to be arrested in the morning. He's going to die the next day. Why would he be taking the time to do a Passover meal? Why would he do that? Is that Tommy? He was a good Jew, right? Is that what you said? Okay. He was obeying the law. He was a good Jew. He had to do that in order to obey the law. Remember, that Passover meal was instituted, and it was a time of remembrance. You remember the book of Exodus describes this great intervention of God with the nation of Egypt, Pharaoh and his people, the Israelites. Israel's in bondage. And so in order to get them out of this bondage, there has to be this series of plagues. The final one of those is the death of the firstborn. And in order for them to be protected, they had to do this Passover meal, which was kill the lamb, roast it, and they were to eat it standing with their sandals on, with their bags packed, and ready to leave at a moment's notice. You know, and a part of that killing of that lamb was to be the blood applied to the doorpost, which would allow them to not be visited by that 10th plague, the death of the firstborn. So they were to do this in that remembrance. Remember the time when, and so they were to do that. By the way, they would rehearse that. The father would rehearse that event as they stand with their shoes on and their backpack on their back, and they're ready to leave at a moment's notice as they partake of this lamb. The head of the household would remember that event. So Jesus, being a good Jew, has to keep the Passover. He's going to do that. And so that's why he's there. So since he's there, why don't I just use this as a good opportunity to teach? And so he teaches his disciples. But he also does something else. He does something very significant for us, and that is the institution of the Lord's Supper that begins in verse 22. Now that really goes 22 through 25. You have the initiation during this Passover, or following this Passover meal, or during their time there at the table, around this table. You have this institution of this of the Lord's Supper, and that begins in verse 22. So let's, I think we have time, 22 through 25. And as they were eating, he took bread, and after blessing it, broke it, and gave it to them, and said, "Take, this is my body." And he took a cup, which he had given thanks, he gave it to them, and they all drank of it. And he said to them, "This is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many. Truly I say to you, I will not drink again of the fruit of the vine until that day when I drink it new in the kingdom of God." So Mark's account of the Lord's Supper is very brief. As we said, only those verses 22 through 25. And he takes the bread, gives them the bread, and says, "This is my body." he takes the cup. It's only described as the cup, and says, "This is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many." So you have those elements: the unleavened bread and we call it fruit of the vine, the wine that would be in that cup at that time. So they prepare for the Passover, they partake of the Passover, and Jesus takes opportunity at that Passover meal to also institute the Lord's Supper. A very vital part of Christianity, as we recognize. It is so vital in remembering the blessings that we receive from Jesus because of his death. His body is going to be pierced. His body is going to be whipped. His body is going to be torn. It's going to bleed profusely. It's going to experience pain and anguish, and it's just going to experience all of that. So you have the body and the blood being represented here, both of those significant parts of that death of Jesus on the cross. All right, any observations, comments? Yes?
Bread is without yeast. Yeast in the Bible is sin. So it represented a sinful body, a sinless body, excuse me. And then, taking the cup, there was 3 cups in Passover. Some people think this is the second cup, the cup of sanctification, so he was sanctifying who he was. It says that he was the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world. So we have a Passover lamb, and that represents him also. So everything points to one thing, him, Jesus. I'm surprised that there was not some recognition by the 12 when he said, "This is my blood." What were they thinking? I mean, when he said that to them, but there's no indication, or there's no words that what they were thinking whenever he said that. So it's amazing to me that they didn't.
Right. This with their understanding in the place it is at this moment, I'm not surprised they didn't ask any questions. I don't want to look like a fool. I don't want him to chastise me. So their understanding is at a very difficult point, because it's right here that John's going to record some very basic instruction to them, and they're all upset because he's telling them I'm leaving. So they were not going to question him, I think. Or anything else? One of the things that he's also going to do now, and for time, we don't have time to go over this, but in verse 26 beginning all the way through verse 31, this is the prediction of Peter's denials. You'll deny me 3 times. So there you have an understanding of where the disciples are, because Peter's response is, even though they all fall away, I'm not going to do it. There's no way that would happen. You are speaking of something that is not possible to happen. I will not deny you. No, Peter, truly I tell you, this very night, before the rooster crows twice, you will deny me 3 times. And he did. So that, again, he takes time to do that for Peter at this point. And then, of course, the next thing is going to be in Gethsemane, so they're no longer in Jerusalem proper, in the city of Jerusalem, but they've gone outside the city, crossed the Kidron Valley, and moved into the Garden of Gethsemane. All right, I appreciate your comments. I think our time is pretty well up.